I'm technical AI enthusiast.
And I'm Gab, your technical CEO and founder of ToothFairyAI.
And today is a bit of a different session for us today because usually we have our glasses of wine, but today we're going to have our cups of tea because it's very early in the morning for us, so we didn't think having a glass of wine was the right start for the morning. But today we're going to be speaking about two things that we're both really excited about. First, the units of intelligence that ToothFairyAI has just launched, and then we're going to be speaking about 3 2026 AI predictions. So Gab, units of intelligence, we're super excited at ToothFairyAI to obviously speak about this. How's it been going? So we've just launched over the Christmas period. How's the team finding the units of intelligence?
Units of intelligence is something we're extremely excited about at ToothFairy for a couple of reasons. One is that the team put a lot of effort to ensure that this type of capability was enabled by the beginning of the year, which was the most logical moment to actually make a transition like that. The second is that so far we got an incredible response from the customer base. Just to give you an idea in terms of what we saw, customers that used to have just 5 seats with their business subscription, overnight they got 550 seats that they could use, and they could finally expand their AI solution across the entire business without necessarily increasing in cost, but is the commitment and also bet that we make in terms of how we see the future of AI, where we should not price AI around seats and licenses. Rather, we should price AI on intelligence and effort that it takes to deliver a result.
So can you give an example of what that would actually look like in practice? So for example, if we look at our ToothFairyAI business subscription, which is $250 for 5 seats, let's say a business who was using that subscription had 2 colleagues that were using those 2 seats. What would that look like in how their pricing might change, or the additional features that they might have on access with the new units of intelligence approach?
Yeah, so there were a couple of limitations that generally customers never saw due to the nature of the seats, where statistically you wouldn't consume so much in terms of intelligence before units of intelligence were a thing. But to give you an example that shows how the transition worked, before, if a business with, let's say, 40 people wanted to give access to ToothFairy, they only had a couple of ways. One, buying the seats, so which means that then the 250 would have become something much bigger than 250. Now, on top of my head, it would have costed more than $3,000 a month to give 40 people seats. And also, the second thing is that we had to throttle some types of requests, because imagine for a moment you want to make only videos through ToothFairyAI, and let's say you had 1,000 requests or 5,000 requests available. Even for us, the pricing would not have worked, because you would have consumed a lot of intelligence to generate all those videos, which is much more pricey than generating text. Does this part relate a bit to what potentially you've seen also in terms of how you use other products? Like sometimes you might get a product that does a lot of things, but then in reality you use it only for one specific thing.
Yeah, it makes total sense, and I think it's really important for businesses that are scaling, like you said. They might want 1,000 of their staff to use ToothFairy or another AI product, yet buying per seat can become just astronomical in terms of pricing. So then to be able to really use the platform in terms of, and pay for in terms of just what they're using, in terms of the output, I think it's really important. And I think it makes sense, because the way I see it is, if you're using a more sophisticated model, you would be paying a little bit more than if you were to be using a basic model. Or if you're doing tasks that are such as creating images versus text, you would think that creation of an image takes a lot more grunt work for the AI, and therefore it would use more units of intelligence. Did I get that right?
You absolutely got the main point. So with that in mind, it makes sense that even from our end as providers, we price the solution around what you actually use it for, as opposed to giving you a quota of different type of requests without taking into account that you might get the platform to do one specific thing. And there is also another component that I think is even more important. So we wanted to go with the extreme concept of generating videos and images, okay? But normally businesses don't use our product for that. I would say that less than 3% of the consumption that we have through the platform is related to video and images. It's not the core business that we have. Most of it is LLMs, okay? It's based on text. When you look at the cost of how much a task that an agent accomplishes might cost, it really comes down to two things. How long it took in terms of how many turns the agent had to perform, or how many subtasks the agent had to perform, and what kind of model you're running. That makes a massive difference in terms of cost on a scale of 1 to 50. So it makes sense that us as providers, they give you access to the models, price the cost of running an agent around also the size of the model you use. And that's why we have, if I'm not mistaken, 6 now categories, from extra small to extra large, that price tokens based on that, which means that you can create effective ways of using agents by considering that you have a budget of units of intelligence. You can decide that for simple tasks, you don't need the state-of-the-art large language model, and you can use a very small model consuming very little units of intelligence. While for the critical task, you might decide to use the highest intelligence model. And in that case, you would be spending a bit more. But we are excited to see that customers are already embracing this new concept by now selectively choose which model they want to use. And as a final thought, I think it's also gonna incentivize customers significantly in now fine-tuning models, because the other beautiful thing is that we don't charge customers extra if they're using their own fine-tuned small models. So if a model was small before fine-tuning, the model stays small after fine-tuning, which means that there is an incentive then in making the investment to train the small model and then reap the benefits of running a small model, which costs little units of intelligence in the long term.
That's a really great point, and I like that we're incentivizing the fine-tuning of models, because it's so important for businesses, particularly businesses that have some time and resourcing to spend time in fine-tuning their models, to really make those models bespoke for their organisation, their sector, so then the responses from AI are better as well, which I think it's sometimes a missing piece of the conversation when we talk about AI and AI agents, is that the models really have an impact on how those agents can perform. So when you do have those models that are fine-tuned to your specific business, using your sector jargon, so to speak, that the responses that come through are a lot more impactful. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely, and it creates even more of a parallelism between what, given in previous podcasts, I discussed as the hybrid workforce. So we believe businesses will start thinking of fine-tuning models as an investment in training employees, which nowadays businesses do all the time. It's not unheard of that you spend maybe 2 weeks with an employee before the employee starts doing any valuable work, because they need to learn how to do things. We believe that the same thing can happen with models and agents, where let's say that there is a task that you want an agent to complete. You spend time in training the model in this case, or training the agent, and then you know that down the line, the results and the reliability of this kind of automation and agents will be higher because you put the time in training, in this case, not a human being, but an agent. So
another question I had is just regarding tokens. So what would be the difference between units of intelligence and tokens?
So tokens are a subset of what we would define as units of intelligence at ToothFairy. So we try to make it as transparent as possible for our customers, how we are pricing the units of intelligence, and we thought the best way was to use the industry standard that is currently used across the globe. So in a sense, tokens represent the units of intelligence for what LLMs are concerned, and also VLMs, so visual language models. The reason why we had to do this is to ensure that even from our side, there is clarity in terms of how we price our tokens. And again, customers have the opportunity to really understand what is our position rather than having crazy numbers flying around for models that, again, we don't want to create additional confusion for customers. However, units of intelligence work also in other areas, which are, for example, the embeddings. When you upload data inside what we call knowledge hub, which is essentially similar to the knowledge base that agents would use to perform RAG operations. That also impacts, not to the same degree, the units of intelligence, because we decided to price the cost that we face to embed, to store data that then the agents can retrieve. In that case, you wouldn't be talking about tokens necessarily. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense for customers. Instead, we wrapped it inside the concept of units of intelligence. Same thing when you talk about video generation, image generation. These are not workflows that you would be charging tokens for. However, again, for simplicity, we simply give a bucket of units of intelligence, and then it's up to businesses to understand, based on our prices, how to use them for the best use case possible, I guess. And obviously, if a business or an enterprise runs out of tokens, depending or units of intelligence, depending on the contract we have in place, they can always add on top. So this really gives the opportunity to businesses to pay for what they use rather than paying for seats that might never actually be used by the employees. And we think that this is a fairer way of looking at the entire market.
And I like in ToothFairy what we've done for units of intelligence is that depending on the model that you select, you can also see how many units of intelligence will be used. So it's very transparent and I suppose easy to get your head around how much units of intelligence you'll be using for a task or the type of model that you're selecting as well.
Yes, from what we have seen in the last 36 months working across the globe, no business is willing to accept products that can cost unpredictable amounts in terms of, in most cases, OPEX, so operational expenditure. And it creates massive friction when you try to introduce a brand new technology like AI that you can then say, well, it can cost as much as you like. The more you use it, the more you pay. That's not something that many CTOs, CIOs we talk to are willing to accept. Their job could be on the line. So the solution that we have is to give blocks of units of intelligence where only if a customer approves the automatic addition of credits, you are bound to a specific number of units of intelligence, which you can call it is your budget, and then you cannot go beyond that. And obviously this again helps. This is not necessarily a technological innovation that we are doing. I'm sure that many other industries follow exactly the same principle, but believe it or not, are the sorts of things that give peace of mind to businesses to say, okay, yeah, we're willing to adopt it, we will make it work within the budget that we have, and no one is going to lose their jobs because, you know, obviously we went over budget or things like that.
Yeah, I like the units of intelligence budget. So it's really simple to see what you're using, how you're using your AI, and then also it ensures that you don't go over budget because you have to approve to then have more units of intelligence once you've used your quota. So yeah, it's really interesting, and I think we're going to have a lot of great conversations with customers as well. And so far the response has been really positive, which is fantastic. So with that, we wanted to also talk about 2026. Okay, we've started a new year. What's going to be happening with AI in 2026? What do you see as your top 3 predictions?
Yeah, so obviously we talked a lot in ToothFairy. I think you have been included in a lot of these conversations, and also a lot of our strategy is designed around what we think is going to happen in 2026, right? So the key prediction that we have is that this year is going to be the year of autonomous agents applied in businesses, similar to what coding agents have been in 2025 in the development space. To give you an example, 12 months ago, if I was to say something like, we will one day run agents that could go on for 50, 60 minutes, making changes to our code base, just based on a good and well-structured prompt that tells the agent what to do inside our application or anything like that, so that the agent overnight builds the feature for us, and then in the morning we need to test it and verify the work that they've done. You would have probably, myself included, would have said, okay, this is ridiculous, this is not going to happen, right? Would you say that this was something that you would have thought possible 12 months ago?
Well, I mean, working in ToothFairy, I probably thought that it was possible, but I think like generally a lot of businesses are still getting their head around agents, let alone autonomous agents. So, and also there's sometimes a confusion between workflows as well in that mix. So maybe we take a step back for a moment, if you don't mind, and can you explain to us what's the difference between workflows that have then agentic capabilities? I suppose there's 2 categories there, agents and then autonomous agents, because they're 4 very different things, and I think it's important that we understand what the differences are when we have these types of conversations.
Yeah, and this has been something that obviously we have to discuss with customers. I think, again, for the last 36 months, and thanks to the noise and the hype, customers are confused, so it's always good to repeat the difference. So whenever you're looking at a workflow, fundamentally the key difference with an agent, let alone an autonomous agent, is that the workflow is static in nature. And by that I mean that it's not necessarily sequential in a single path. What I'm trying to say is that the logic that is used to resolve a series of nodes that are part of the workflow, which could be a decision-making node or it could be an execution node, is statically defined by someone. It's not that there is something fundamentally wrong with the concept of a workflow. As a matter of fact, I do believe that even in the AI generation, workflows do have their own space. However, they come with some caveats. So if you have 1, 5, 10 workflows and you have one person that is willing to maintain these workflows, then it's great. I mean, you reduce complexity by introducing something statically defined that you know is reliable over time at that specific thing. However, the problem is when the workflows are faced with unpredictable scenarios, or the way to resolve a task or to complete a task is not covered in the existing definition of the workflow. In that case, all the big limitations of workflows come. For example, you cannot reasonably create thousands of workflows to cover all the potential business scenarios that you might be facing. So you will end up either having workflows that are unmaintainable and become very quickly spaghetti code and things like that, or you have to rely on an hybrid approach where you have some things that are covered by a workflow, some things that are covered by something else, okay? Which generally we're talking human beings. A workflow, if you want to spot it visually, whenever you see a platform that says that they allow you to build agents and then in the end you have to drag and drop nodes on a canvas, that's generally the indication that you're not talking about agents. You're talking about workflows with AI assistance, or what I like to call workflow AI aided. So essentially they are an enhancement of the existing workflows. There are some very good examples like with N8N, which I know for a fact can allow you to inject a node, which they call agent, which is very convenient from a marketing perspective, but essentially you would inject some of the generative AI components inside the workflow to make it look like you're doing something special, but you aren't. The second version is agents. So, and here is where the differences start becoming a bit more complicated to spot. So the definition of an agent is essentially an AI entity that can accomplish a task as opposed to just answering a question. Because if you just want a question to be answered, to be honest, you don't need an agent, you just need a large language model. So that's my easy definition, okay? So whenever you talk about tasks, to me, you start talking about agents. Then the problem is, how is the agent accomplishing that task, and what kind of task can the agent accomplish? For example, if you want an agent to find information about your company that can be provided in terms of services that you give, the best practices to use your product, most likely you would have an LLM wrapped under an agentic framework of some sort that can retrieve data based on the user request or user query, and then provide information back to the customer. And have this conversational component, which means that the customer can then ask follow-up questions and then keep on providing answers. And as part of the process, for example, the customer could decide to say, okay, I want to speak to a human agent, or I want you to create a ticket. In that case, still, in my opinion, you would still consider that kind of use case agents. So essentially someone that, despite the fact that is not necessarily the most complicated use case that we know in AI exists, still accomplishes a task, doesn't just reply to questions, because it can create, for example, tickets, okay, or it can pass on the request to an actual human being. So you're moving away from the concept of just replying, you're taking an action, even if it's about delegation, okay? That's, to me, agent, which is what we have been doing in ToothFairy for the most part until mid last year. Then mid last year, we introduced agentic tooling, which is the autonomous agents component. We've also worked obviously on orchestrator agents that spin up agents on the fly, but let's concentrate on agentic tooling. That's the autonomous agents component. So it's everything that I've said so far stays true. So the agent can accomplish the task that I was mentioning before. However, with autonomous agents, the agent decides to take what we call multi-turn actions, which means that an agent can decide on its own to run multiple tools, multiple requests to accomplish a task given by a user. The easy way to detect if you're talking to an autonomous agent as opposed to just an agent is the amount of time it takes. Because similar to a person that needs to figure out every single time how to do something, generally these agents don't give you quick answers. They plan, show you what they're about to do, take one step, verify the outcome of that step, decide what to do next, always keeping track of the overall task that you have given them. For instance, in ToothFairy, we use rolling horizon as technology to allow the agent to plan constantly. This characteristic is extremely useful when you want to deal with always different cases. So where you really want, I wouldn't call it a human-like intelligence, but something that can decide its path and decide its flow of reasoning autonomously, and you're willing to let it run for longer than 15 seconds so that you give an answer to a customer and allow the agent to explore all the tools that are available to accomplish, in many cases, at a higher value requirement.
So would you say that autonomous agents are best used for those more complex tasks, and sometimes also when the human user doesn't know necessarily how to complete the task? so the agent can look at different options and different ways to complete a task. Is that an example of where you might use an autonomous agent?
Absolutely, and I have an example that maybe you can use as well.
Yeah, tell us.
So at ToothFairy, obviously, we generate agents also for customers. Believe it or not, because of the tremendous amount of features that we release, many of our team members do not know every single SDK and API endpoint that we expose. Okay, this is technical stuff, but imagine reading a manual and not knowing all the different options that your manual exposes, okay? For any kind of device, including software. Literally yesterday, one of our engineers connected the ToothFairy MCP, so the Model Context Protocol. It's available for any customer and any subscription that basically connects agents to documentation, API, and SDK, okay? So it can accomplish multiple things. They created literally their own manual to learn about fine-tuning and embeddings.
Wow.
Just using the ToothFairy MCP that gave them obviously documentation about how we handle it so that they could explain to customers how to do certain things in ToothFairy. In that sense, would you say that, I'm pretty sure, I didn't ask, but I'm pretty sure it did not take 10 seconds to do that. Potentially it took 5 minutes. But this is exactly one of those use cases that you were mentioning, like you don't know how to do something.
Yeah.
In that case, latency is not really a factor. You're willing to wait 5 minutes to...
Yeah, to find a solution, you're willing to wait, right? Yeah, it makes total sense. Okay, well, I think that's a really good overview of the different, workflows and AI agents versus autonomous agents. So if we go back then to your prediction, did we finish your second prediction? I think you had a bit more to elaborate on.
I believe that, first of all, the first prediction was what we just discussed in terms of autonomous agents is what I think is going to start becoming, I would call it mainstream. I'm a bit pessimistic about that. I think businesses still are lagging way behind. And us AI providers are not helping because, quite frankly, we're always coming up with something new. But definitely, this is probably the year of businesses that are early adopters of autonomous agents, which will allow us to learn and improve further the technologies. That's the first prediction. I guess that the second is that similar to what we did with, or at least on the same wavelength of units of intelligence, it's clear that AI models are getting better and better. And whether you believe that there is a plateau down the line or not, it doesn't really nowadays make any difference whatsoever, because with the current capabilities that we have of models, there is tons that can be done. I'm confident that we could drive these autonomous agentic behaviors across the vast majority of the businesses with the state-of-the-art models that we have today. So imagine if we start talking about models that are even more capable. However, one of the things that we see already is cost of intelligence. So customers will not look just at the raw intelligence of a model, which is a scalar or mono-dimensional figure, okay? They will be looking at cost per intelligence. Why this is so important in 2026 as opposed to 2025 or 2024? It's all well and good that we talk about autonomous agents. One of the key things that the people need to understand is that autonomous agents, I say, burn tokens. So what I mean by that is that an agent that thinks every single thing that it's thinking costs you money. So you don't really always want the state-of-the-art model that costs a fortune.
Exactly, for a simple task.
For a simple task.
Yes.
So you really need to factor in, especially if agents start becoming an integral part of the business that you run every day. I mean, you want to be efficient in the way you use intelligence. And another way of saying it, you don't want a PhD student to do service desk assistants, okay? No offense for service desk, but you see what I'm saying.
Yes,
So depending on the qualification. That I think is going to be an important factor. I think that at ToothFairy we are very well positioned on that because, again, documents of intelligence, but I think that this is going to be one of those topics that CTOs, CIOs will start talking about because obviously it's going to impact their balance sheet.
Okay, and so what's your last prediction for 2026?
I believe that specialized models that accomplish specific tasks that are specifically trained on handling dedicated tools, which could be, for example, using MCPs or being able to conduct good internet search, will become much more valuable in these agentic and autonomous agents scenarios because they will be more cost efficient than the state-of-the-art large language models, the really big ones. And for platforms like ourselves, it will be a need to combine the capability of multiple models, which we already do, but we always look forward to specialized models that can help us accomplish specific tasks that are part of an overarching plan designed by an autonomous agent. So an autonomous agent doesn't use one model, it uses many behind the scenes. So far, the specialized models haven't taken a good part of the attention of the audience because you always look at these generic benchmarks where you try to maximize the results. This is how we currently define state-of-the-art models. But in an autonomous agentic behavior, it doesn't really matter that the model does most of the tasks right. What matters is that it does one task really right. And then it can be part of an overall architecture that uses multiple models behind the scenes. And that's what I think in 2026 we'll start seeing, linked to the fact that obviously we have to drive cost efficiencies.
Well, thanks for joining us for this special AI Wind Down edition with our tea. Actually, Gab, we're going to do a cheers. If you've got any questions or any comments based on today's episode, please pop them in the comments below and we'll be sure to respond to them. And subscribe and follow us to learn more about AI in the world and also ToothFairyAI. Thanks again, everyone. Bye.